House Appropriations Subcommittee on School Aid and Department of Education will come to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Representative Kelly.
Here.
Representative Jenkins Arno.
Here.
Representative Markkinen.
Here.
Representative Beeson.
Here.
Representative Borton.
Here.
Representative Glanville.
Present.
Representative Steckloff. You have a quorum.
Clerk. Representative Jenkins Arno moves to approve the minutes of June 11th, 2025 meeting. There being no objections, the minutes are approved. Thank you all for coming this morning. Last spring, kind of identified a interest in trying to get what we can get from local superintendents about what barriers to excellence that Lansing rules, regs kind of inhibit or keep them from doing a better job. I want to try and do what we can to eliminate Lansing as an excuse, whether it be appropriations or rules and regulations. So trying to do what we can to delve into keep seeing what keeps things that we might be able to improve by through elimination. So we have several superintendents today. We're going to start out with Matt Schuler, Director of Government Relations with Michigan Association of School Administrators, and I think he'll direct traffic from that point on. So the floor is yours, Matt.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you very much for having us here today. We really appreciate the opportunity. As the chair said, we want to talk to you today about kind of how the decisions that you all make in Lansing, whether it be through the budget, primarily through the budget today, but also through statute, how it impacts administrators and leaders, school leaders on the ground, just as far as what the boilerplate that you guys pass, what it means on the ground as far as complying, the reporting, and all of that. Obviously, the budget passed a few weeks ago, and that's still at the top of all of our members' minds. So we are going to talk about some of the challenges that they faced with the budget delay and just kind of trying to understand some of the items and why they were changed, why they were eliminated. And again, I think we want to focus on, in a typical budget process, we superintendents would be able to kind of say, okay, you're thinking about changing this program. Here are the impacts that it would have. For a lot of reasons, nothing to do with anyone in this room, that really didn't happen. We had to wait until October to get a budget, and it was just kind of finalized. So I think what we would love to do is have today start a dialogue of working with you all on explaining the impacts and how we can work together on a budget next year. So we have 5 superintendents from across the state. They're going to talk to you about reporting requirements, competitive grants, and about issues in the budget. So I'm going to turn it over to them right now.
Hello, I am Patrick O'Rourke from Fowler Public Schools, about 30 minutes up the road from here. Pretty nice drive this morning. Traffic was easy, which was great. First of all, I would like to thank you guys for having me here today. I know you're plenty busy and there's a lot going on right now, so I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to meet with us. One thing I do want to touch on, and I am very appreciative coming from a very rural district, the transportation funding that came through the budget. I would like to thank you guys for that. That is vital for my district. We're about 1,000 people, and majority of my people either live on a farm or live awfully close to farms. So that's made a huge difference. Just a little personal story on that. My kids go to my district. So my son Grayson, first time going on the bus, very nervous. Anybody that went on the bus as a kid can remember the looking up, oh my gosh, bus driver, oh my gosh, big kids. Our buses have up through seniors. So when you're 6, that's kind of terrifying. So he's standing there, Michigan State shirt on, go Sparty, anybody that loves Sparty. Looks up at the bus driver, older gentleman, wonderful person, but older gentleman. Can tell he's nervous, looks down at him, comes down there. Hey, Grayson, what about Michigan State? So gives my son a chance to talk, and diehard Michigan State, diehard everything sports you can imagine, even down to pickleball for anybody that's a part of the pickleball revolution that's currently going on in the world. Of course, bus driver Jeff has a Michigan shirt on. So Grayson tells him about it and looks at Jeff's shirt and says, but I don't like your shirt. So Jeff just laughs. They have a good joke about it, and now every time he rides the bus, he and Jeff have that joke. He gets on, and Jeff go blue and Grayson go white, and it's awesome. I mean, I could tell countless stories about this for all of our kids, because bus driver Jeff's amazing, but so is the other bus driver Jeff. Yes, we've got 2 bus driver Jeffs. So is bus driver Rooney. So is bus driver Jerry. All of them. But the beauty for me and what that's done for my district is, for a lot of my kids, that's the first and the last person they see in a day. And they get a smile, they get a connection, and those bus drivers know every single kid on those buses. You're talking about 70 to 75 kids on a full bus, maybe more like 40 to 45 on one that's not quite so full. But they know every kid, they say hi to them every day, and that connection just starts their day so well. And when they've had a long day at the end of the day, because kids do, sometimes school's hard, it ends their day amazing. So I am incredibly appreciative for that funding. That makes a huge difference for my district. And honestly, it makes a huge difference for my families. Most families, both parents are working, and it is difficult to get their kids to school at times. So that's allowed us to continue to provide that high quality busing. So thank you guys for that. So before I start talking to get into competitive grants, I want to talk a little bit about the structure of Fowler Public Schools, as well as what our belief is. So we are a very small district, about 450 kids when we look at FTE. That includes some shared time that we do with some of our local private schools to support some of those things. But very small district, so we work on a very tight budget to make sure that we keep dollars as close as possible to our students. That's always the goal. But starting with our beliefs, and a little quote that we like to live off of. While we may not know what the future holds for all of our students, we do know one thing. We have been tasked with supporting them to get there. The truth is, we cannot open all of the doors for them. However, we can provide the keys to allow them to. So we live by that. How are we going to give them those keys so when they walk up to the doors, that they can be the difference? I will speak on a myriad of topics today, but I do want to start by talking about what our central office looks like. So my role in the district, I am the superintendent, high school principal, tech director, as well as grants, federal, state, and state grant supervisor. My business manager, who is awesome, just turned 26, very new, but is amazing. She is what you would consider a CFO, an HR director, and a benefits coordinator. My executive assistant, also amazing. She is the per pupil accounting. She oversees per pupil accounting. She oversees PR for us. All communications go out from her. She's our HR assistant, and she's also the assistant to the board. If that sounds like a lot, in many districts, that would probably be a range of 7 to 11 jobs. For us, it's 3 full-time positions. It's a lot, but again, we have a tight budget, and we work incredibly hard to keep dollars as close as possible to the students because we know that's where the impact is. Something that does do, it can make it really difficult, especially when we think about competitive grants, trying to oversee some of those grant applications, trying to oversee documentation, trying to follow up with people on those, monitoring, fiscal oversight, all of those types of things. More specifically, diving into competitive grants. Again, being a smaller school, typically you would see in some of your larger schools or some other schools, a grant supervisor that, depending on what their pay rate is, and you add in benefits, is probably $100,000 to $130,000 for the district, maybe more. I'm ballparking a little bit on that one. And the issue we run into, again, that's problematic for small schools and trying to ensure equitable funding for our small schools is kind of threefold. Looking at the fiscal structures of competitive grants, looking at pre-planning, and then looking at documentation. I'll start heavily with fiscal structures. When you think about fiscal structures of grants, when we get a grant code as a district, if you're lucky, you might add 5 accounting lines. But if I'm being real, you're probably adding more in the range of 20-ish accounting lines, whether you have salaries and benefits, whether you have supplies, whether you have contracted services, just a myriad of things that are added. And then you have to think about, okay, does this cover for people? Does this cover per building as well? Because those codes are typically needing to be specific to buildings, to a point to where your general ledger gets pretty out of control. When I look at our lines, we are in excess accounting lines wise of 900 accounting lines. And that does not even count all of our lines for our bonds. And I'm a pretty small district. We have 2 buildings, and that ends up being in excess of 900 lines for a business manager to oversee. And what tends to happen with those fiscal structures when we go through with these competitive grants is that you'll have all of those lines. We'll build our lines we need to for these grants based on the grant code. And then we'll get guidance later on again that, nope, you need a grant code for this. Nope, that's not allowable. So then we've got some lines we don't necessarily need. We need to add more lines. And then that target just keeps moving further and further as that grant goes on further and further. Speaking on that, pre-planning is another real struggle, thinking about as those grants, as those allowables change, as those structures change. It gets really hard to pre-plan. How do you create a great budget and a great impact for students when you don't know what's allowable in these competitive grants? For us, those competitive grants come down to myself making a plan. I work very hard to work with our teaching staff, but I also have teaching staff that have upwards of 5 to 6 preps that they teach, and I do not want to take them away from kids any more than I have to. Most of them also are involved as club advisors, as class advisors, as coaches. So they're working very hard to be in these kids' lives, and I want to keep them there as much as possible. So I end up taking on most of that work, which again is fine. That is my role, and my job is to break down those barriers for the staff, so I'm trying everything I can to do so. But it's almost impossible to pre-plan when you don't know what the target is. And then when the target just moves and it moves and it moves and it moves on what's allowable and how you have to document that.
Particularly once it's started.
Yeah, very frequently it is after it started. And I will dive into an example of exactly where that happened to us that was very difficult. Before I get to that example, documentation, again, we have what is given to us right away, which is typically after the application process has started. And then it's, no, you need to document this. No, you need to document, nope, that's not the kind of documentation we wanted. Oh, nope, that wasn't allowable anymore. That happens all the time with our documentation. Again, we want to be good stewards of our community's money. Those are taxpayer dollars going to work. But it's really hard when we're not told what is acceptable. And then when we're told after the fact, after these monies have gone out and after we've created a plan, hey, now we need documentation on this. And the answer we get when we ask why is because the auditors told us. And it's like, okay, but what is the impact on kids of that documentation? How is that helping us to keep dollars as close as possible to the kids? And that is not an answer that we pretty much ever get. So a prime example of this for Fowler was 35J funding for literacy. We're a small district. We work incredibly hard to keep our resources up to date, but that's not always easy to do. We were fortunate enough to apply for 35J funding to look at a Tier 1 curriculum for our K-5 literacy. We did qualify for that, but I want to dive back and go through what that looked like and what that entire process looked like. So these dollars were approved in July of that fiscal year of 23. We did not see an application come out or any guidance come out until January, so lag time immediately. Our hope was that we were going to dive in as soon as possible with piloting this program so that we could figure out, hey, whatever program we go with is obviously going to have some things that we have to support and some holes that we've got to find and fix. Well, the application didn't come out till January. It was due in February, later February, so some time to put together some pre-planning. There was updated guidance in March after the application was already put out there and it was already had to be turned in or already had to be submitted, excuse me. So updated guidance in March as to what was allowable, as to how you had to document, as to when the money was going to come. Okay, so we'll make this work. We'll roll with the punches as well as we can, even though that was a month after we turned in our application saying how we were going to use these dollars to impact students. Then we received a memo in May, I believe it was on May 19th, that the dollars that were supposed to come on May 20th, again, that were supposed to be for the 23-24 school year, May 20th, 2024, and I'll remind you, our fiscal year ends June 30th. We're going to be delayed until June 20th. So they were coming in the June 20th state aid budget, which is, for most districts, probably either really close or after you're finalizing your budgets already for the following school year. So at that point, obviously we need to pivot because, one, those dollars are coming 10 days before they're saying they're intended to be used to impact kids again. And two, if they got delayed from May 20th to June 20th, I'm not particularly confident they're not going to get delayed from June 20th to our next payment, right? And you start to get in a real bad spot when you have expenditures for lines that don't match revenues for lines. When you get to your end of the year FID and your FER to oversee those, your final expenditure report. So I'm not going to have that happen where with the state we get dinged by the state because, well, you had these grant codes and you didn't have any revenue for these. How could you possibly spend that money that wasn't there? So that puts us having to push that money back. So that puts us back another year of being able to implement high quality materials that based on Ed Reports, and Ed Reports is a third party basically that looks at curriculums to see alignment. with not only standards, but also the science of reading. So a program that we found that is highly effective, used a lot of different places, aligns with state standards and aligns with the science of reading, which I believe is a huge push and should be. And we had to delay not only PD for that for our staff, but just even purchasing the materials to be able to get it in staff's hands. Luckily, I have an amazing staff that once we got it in their hands, dove into it over the summer. But again, time that they're uncompensated for, willing to put in because they care about kids. And that is what we did. We worked hard to push forward to do this, but it was just, the process is just absolutely unbelievable. I stop, and that is not the only time that has happened, but that's the one that comes to mind to me. Because again, high impact curriculum, going to help our students be more successful, going to support our kids' learning, and again, align with what I see as best practices between science of reading and the standards that we're currently teaching. The level of frustration with that, just unbelievable. And that for that funding continues to move. Then it got switched that you're gonna get 50% in this year and 50% in that year. Well, I'm not gonna buy 50% of it. What am I gonna teach half the kids in a classroom, or just teach half the kids and then not have my K-5 aligned to be able to build up those same learning targets as well as those same expectations? Because obviously kids learn best when those expectations are consistent. And you can't do that if you've got 4 or 5 different resources. Again, I could dive into more of the issues with competitive grants, but that is one I pretty specifically can identify as very frustrating. And again, thinking about being a small school and having limited staff, most of those things I take on while also evaluating teachers, while also greeting kids at the door, while also looking at technology rotations. And it's just very frustrating that the level of inefficiency is taking away from our staff being able to stay as close as possible to our students and building those connections, building those relationships, and supporting their learning. I'm going to switch just a little bit here into some unfunded mandates, but another item that, again, creates inefficiencies. So then we have dollars that are not as close to students, and we also have time spent for staff that could be supporting students, could be connecting with kids on items that are, in my opinion, fairly unnecessary. One that, again, comes specifically to mind for me is rep reporting and MSDS reporting. So you look at rep reporting and MSDS, one of the biggest things you see in there, and the goal of both of those reporting really is to identify that teachers are teaching in their certified areas, which absolutely, we want to have that. They are the experts in those certified areas, and we want to keep them in those areas. That said, both of the reports do almost the exact same thing. So when this reporting is occurring, and they're not due at the same time, but when this reporting is occurring, I've got my business manager, because of our HR director, overseeing rep. I've got my executive assistant overseeing MSDS, and you're talking days, if not weeks, of looking at, are these teachers teaching in areas they're certified? When, to be frank, I could more or less provide a master schedule that would tell you yes they are or no they are not. They also, again, they're looking for the same thing. They're looking for the same thing, but they don't have the same codes. So when you're looking at, yeah, go ahead.
Question from Representative.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the term you're using, rep reporting?
You're using all the acronyms.
I know,
that
I'm
we use,
doing
and they don't
the
know.
normal, I'm sorry. So rep reporting is to as simple as possible.
It's Registry of Educational Personnel,
Yep,
Okay.
thank you. And
Thank
that's
you.
run through SEPI.
which CEPI is.
I'm sorry, Center for Educational, help me with that.
guys.
I'm sorry, alphabet soup of education, right? Our usual of how many letters can we use.
Thank you for that clarification. Anything,
Thanks, Kate.
Representative Glanville, anything?
I know.
Get so deep
Because
into
I
the
have to
woods.
wear, I have to wear all those hats too, so yeah.
Yeah, get so deep in the woods of talking about these things that it's just normal vernacular for us. But really, the idea is we've got all of our employees in there, and they're looking at, are they working in certified areas, and areas they should be working in. But again, they have separate codes for, let's say the rep has a math code, MSDS has a more specific code for math in terms of robotics. And that's just a general example. That's not necessarily a specific example I'm going over. But those both are required to be done, again, looking for the same information. They also are both required to be in alignment with each other, even though they have different codes. I can tell you right now, the amount of time we waste of making sure that this code is actually what they're asking for here is absolutely astronomical. And again, I have a business office of 3 people, or a superintendent's office, I should say, of 3 people. That's 2 of my people doing that. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense to ask for the same information twice. And again, I agree, teachers should be teaching in areas they're certified and highly qualified. That is not an argument I would ever make. But the fact that we do it in two areas that don't even align with each other makes almost no sense. So to me, again, that just creates more inefficiency and more of our dollars farther away from the people that they're actually supposed to be supporting. And again, it's a mandated report that we do both of those. That is we are subject to penalty if those don't align. So the amount of time we spend on those, it's crazy, and it makes absolutely no sense. And again, it takes away from my ability, because I have to support them with those as the high school principal, where I'm overseeing all of our instruction. It takes away from my executive assistant, who also sits at the front door, greets families coming in, greets students coming in, honestly works as a counselor, a social worker, a nurse, whatever it might look like. But when a kid comes in, she's the person and she's got their back. Well, when you're working on this, it's a lot harder to have their back doing that. And then my HR director, who again is my business manager, can't support my staff in terms of whatever that might be financially, but whatever it might be just from a personal standpoint, because she knows them all very well. Again, the inefficiency it's tough. One other area, and this is more that causes a divide with the community, which again, anybody that knows small or even large communities, if you're going to be successful, there has to be such a close connection between your community and your school, and there has to be a level of trust that you don't even know where the line is between community and school. And that's something I'm very proud of that we do in Fowler. But something that is certainly not helping that is looking at the mandate for the free and reduced lunch information being put out there. It was maybe 2 days ago, I had a community member, wonderful person, and just was reasonable about it, but came up to me and is, Patrick, just a second, I got to stop talking to my wife and then I need to talk to you. Okay, I stood there and love yous to his wife, right? And then what is this free and reduced lunch thing? I'm like, well, that is a mandate from the state that we need to gather that information from all of our community members. And well, they can't make me do that under any litigation. I go, no, sir, they can't. Like they can't necessarily hold you accountable unless you're falsifying information. And he's like, but I don't want my information out there. I don't need this service. I'm not going to qualify for this service. And I don't want to see my information go anywhere. And of course, I assured him, like, that's local information that's going to come with us. But here's the deal. When schools are created to be the conduit of information all the time, which seems to continue to happen, more information is required to be gathered by schools and it's required to be funneled out by schools. It gets hard for community members to feel comfortable about their information always being out there, always being in our hands. And to know, even when I talk to him, and again, I've known this guy I played ice hockey with him when I was 10. So I've known this guy my entire life. So I'm lucky enough to have that trust with him, but that's not always going to be the case, and not every school has that luxury. So trying to continue to have that trust with those community members when you're constantly asking them for information that in some ways is none of our business. So pretty tough on that end. I do want to, I'm not just up here to give, obviously, my frustrations or any issues here. I do want to offer some level of a solution to this problem. One of the big things in our area we talk about is differentiation, right? How do we differentiate based on the individual needs of students? What I'm asking, and what I think a great solution is, how do we differentiate the budget based on the individual needs of our locals? How do we make sure that's the case? And in my eyes, the biggest thing that we can ask for is that flexibility and that adaptability, as well as that seat at the table to have our local experts be able to make those decisions, to be able to use those dollars in a way that fits our communities. My community is very different than these other superintendents' communities. Not right, not wrong, not good, not bad, different. And that's why we need that flexibility and that adaptability. I want to circle back to where I started kind of with my whole spiel. And I think actually, instead of it being how we feel at Fowler, I actually think this absolutely applies to everybody in this room. While we may not know what the future holds for all of our students, we do know one thing. We've been tasked with supporting them to get there. Truth is, we cannot open all of the doors for them. However, we can provide the keys to allow them to. All I am asking is that you guys provide us with the keys to be able to support our communities the way it best fits our communities at a local level, and provide us that flexibility and that adaptability to do so. I appreciate your guys' time, and thank you so much.
Thank you. A couple of questions that I have. What would you estimate the cost of doing business with MDE?
Boy, that's a lot.
I mean, put a percentage on it.
Are you talking in terms
of your-
inefficiencies it causes?
Yeah.
How much time, I think?
How much time is it? I mean, there's clearly a cost when you're calling, writing, corresponding back and forth with all these things. There's clearly a cost.
I would say about 25%
Yeah.
of my time is spent
Yep.
doing
So,
it.
okay, so I mean, 25% of your budget is spent on,
I'd say 25% of my time. I don't know if I could call that 25% of my budget, but at least 25% of my time, probably more of my business manager's time, because the amount of, I would say, I mean, if I think about this last week, I bet out of she usually works about 55 hours a week. I would say out of those 55 hours, she was on the phone with MDE 30.
all right. The it seems to me, because you've got this late coming out with the funds in January, and then they want the report or something in February. I would think a fiscal year alignment has to be done with the state. That we can't keep running this idea that this is a smooth flow when you've got a 3-4 month difference in fiscal years. How much would it be just to say, okay, you're going to go with the state fiscal year?
That would be really difficult. for
Why?
schools Because of the timing of that. So
Is it more difficult to change or more difficult to keep it as it is?
I guess that depends on if we can move to the point where we're working together.
I would think alignment would have to be done to be working together.
Well, and if that's the caveat to that, I think it's worth the conversation to see how it could be done. I think some of the roadblocks to that might be things like hiring our personnel, right?
I could see a year that it could be a disruptor, but after that, why would it be a continued thing?
Well, a lot of the problem is that you have significant changes over the summer in staffing. And so then to get to that October 1st date, we've already been in school, right? So
No, but there'd have to be some sort of ramp up if we said it
But
were going to do.
But if we had a budget plan ahead of time, even if the year's October 1st, I think it would be manageable.
Yeah, I think ideally for me on that topic, it would just be easier if those budgets were separated, and we know our budget when the fiscal year that matches really what our services are starts at that July. When I follow what you're saying, and I think there's certainly a level of reasonability to that, but in that world, I think ideally that would, if those budgets were separated, that'd be, I would think, would make work easier for you guys, but would certainly make more sense with our hiring procedures, with how our school years start and when our school years start. Just
All right. And then lastly, when you're reporting on free and reduced, are you reporting back to the state or just the feds or both?
so that would depend on what choices are made to. Well, I guess I'll answer this in twofold. That information comes to us, and then we have a report that goes together that I believe would end up with the state and the federal based on if it's Title I information or based on if it's 31A information. But one thing that is on there, and I'm sure this is on other forms, is if people want this to be sent out for Medicare information. And
Well, this is information that FAFSA asked for too, and everybody's trying to encourage everybody to do FAFSA. My initial question about the free and reduced is if we've got universal breakfast, why does it matter in the state?
Yeah, so what it actually ends up impacting us more on is it determines 31A funding, and that part of that allocation is looking at that percentage of free and reduced lunch.
Here in the state, if it's universal, what does it matter?
Because that free and reduced rate that we measure.
Oh, for at
is
risk.
what qualifies
thank
us
you,
for
yeah.
at-risk
Right.
and for federal funding.
All right,
Yep.
all right.
That's the.
you have a
hurdle there.
question?
That's the caveat that makes that difficult. And
All right.
again, I understand and I kind of made this point. I get where my families are coming from. Why is this information something you need when I don't want to? That's like asking them to apply for, I don't know, whether it's unemployment when they know they're not going to get it and they don't need it. Like, well, no, we just want you to do this because that's how it feels for our families. But that's the impact on us is that at-risk funding.
All right, Representative Glanville.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for, I think you painted a really great visual of what it's like to manage a school. And I would argue, even if it's a large school, you have many of the same barriers and concerns. So I wanted to return to this idea of the school year budget. And I'm wondering, and this ties in a little bit to the grant piece too. So understanding that schools operate until we move to year-round, and that'll be another conversation. Schools are operating on the schedule that you have, and your fiscal year naturally, it aligns, it's to the July 1st fiscal year. So rather than seeking to align fiscal years, I mean, it might actually be easier to move the state back, but that's also another conversation. But I'm wondering if it would just make it easier if the grants themselves were formulaic and we had an actual spending plan for our schools that's mapped out for, 5 or 10 years, so that you knew what the funding would be and we wouldn't have to have this conversation every year. I mean, certainly we would need to be tweaking things from time to time.
Imagine if we knew those.
But
That sounds amazing, because we work hard on some really educated guesses. We do our best, but
Yeah.
that would make it a lot easier to plan to keep those dollars as close as possible to our kids.
And that would keep us as legislators, like it would put some guardrails around these, perennial changes to things, and allow you to just settle in and do work for a number of years with the expectation, okay, after our 5-year master plan is up, whatever that looks like. Can you talk a little bit about the value of a formulaic grant versus a competitive grant? And do you see these grant buckets as necessary? And then, like, how does that, what's the difference, or what's the comparison between a formulaic and a competitive grant?
Sure, and we typically, when we think about formulaic, we think a little bit more about those categoricals than grants. Not that some grants aren't formulaic, but
Right.
kind of keeping those categoricals that are very, very important and help to serve all kids and measure level of equity. Certainly a lot easier for us to dive into, but in terms of comparing that to competitive grants, I very openly will say competitive grants are incredibly inequitable. It's like I said, I worked through it, and I am not the only district that looks like this with that level of administrative staff, again, with the focus being that those dollars stay close to kids, so we don't want a lot of extra administrative staff. But if you think about a district that's got 11, 12, 13 people to do these things, they certainly have a leg up, not only on planning, not only on documentation, but again, that means all of their other staff then doesn't have to be pulled away from kids. So then that's how they can help keep their dollars closer. So there's absolutely competitive grants cause serious inequities, and I would say in particular for our small rural schools, because we don't have staff that just does that.
So indulge me just for a second. So it's this 35J that you were talking about. That was a competitive grant. But we know that literacy is an issue across the state.
Sure.
So I feel like, and I'm just trying to give an example here based on what we've talked about already. So we could make, in theory, literacy grants formulaic, and then you wouldn't have to, all that would disappear for you in that particular area.
Yeah, and in particular, the level, like you said, to your point, the application process, the level of documentation, all of those things that take away from kids and are not particularly helpful in supporting a kid's growth or building a relationship. Yeah, that would make a big difference if we're not looking at all of that just stuff that goes with competitive
And then
grants.
if we compare that idea of making literacy part of a formula, what's your opinion on why don't we just put it all into per pupil funding? Why do we even need these separate categories?
I would have to dive pretty deeply into that. It's a pretty big question. Katie, do you want to jump on that a little bit?
I'm Katie Zenekas-Mikowski. I'm the superintendent of Johannesburg-Lewiston Area Schools. I'm in Rep. Horton's district. And I've been a superintendent now for over 15 years. What I would say is, taking it back down to basics, is this. Categoricals versus competitive grants. Categorical pieces are important to level the playing field. Things like the transportation funding. My district covers over 300 square miles. My buses go down well-beaten paths. And so transportation for me is a higher expense than it is for a district that's maybe 5 square miles and on all paved roads. Those categoricals level the playing field. If we look at and Kelly and we've had meetings on this before. If you talk about the categorical we get for state testing, okay, there's a mandated benchmark assessment that we're required to do. And that everyone in the state is given the same amount per pupil on as a categorical to use for that state testing. That is something that could be part of the foundation allowance in its own. It doesn't need to be its own categorical because everybody gets the same amount across the state. That's not the same with at-risk funding, where you're looking to level that playing field of at-risk students with those that maybe come from a more well-off area. So to understand the individual categoricals, and I know one of our other superintendents can show you, at the end of the year last year, I think we had 18 or 22 categorical areas. Some of them are really important categoricals, and other ones maybe we can get rid of. And so those are things I think we could work on together for that. Another piece that I think is really important in all of this conversation is accountability, right? You want to know that the taxpayer dollars are going to places that are improving the education of students. And so how do we measure that and how do we look at that? I think is really important. And in the past, and you get all kinds of reports, but you have to question where that data is coming from and how is it used. So as far as the funding piece of it and the financials, we are audited every year. They are posted online. You can see where the money is spent. Having to do individual reports for all of those pieces becomes redundant. If you were talking about education, though, and this is one of the examples that I think kind of sheds light on why assessment and data are a place we can focus. We are at a pivotal point right now in our state. I think we have a situation where we can work with the legislature, the governor's office, and the new leadership at MDE. And I think we can make a difference in all of the working parts to streamline some things. And one of them is that testing piece. So right now, the state mandates that we give the M-STEP assessment. Maybe it was the MEEP assessment when your kids took it, you know, the state assessment we give. One test, one day. I have a kid with anxiety. She has ADHD and an anxiety. You want to know what one test looks like for her as a 3.97 student? It reflects in state assessments because they're one-time assessments, one day measuring one piece. We all know that one test doesn't give you the full picture of an individual. When I was teaching in 2002, I got the data. So I gave an M-STEP test. It said, this is question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A, B, C, D were the options. These are what the answers were. This is the percent of your kids that marked each of these. I dove into that data. I figured out what the kids didn't understand. And I went back and I taught it differently because I had the data. Our teachers don't get that anymore. Our schools don't get that anymore. All they get is on this strand, this is the percentage of your students that did this. We don't know why they didn't get there necessarily. Which brings me back to the categorical and benchmark assessments. We're required to do benchmark assessing. That's assessments we do in the fall, in the winter, and the spring to measure, to make sure our students are making growth on those targets, no matter where they come in at. Whether I have a student that comes in kindergarten, Rep. Borton had to hear this story, whether I have a student that comes into kindergarten who is not potty trained and not speaking, and we have to get them to this level, right? It might take us some time to get there, but man, can we show growth in that student. And so that growth measure is so much more telling of the story of what we're doing. And we need to make a shift as a state as what we're doing with assessment. You look across the nation, the NWEA assessment is a nationally normed assessment. And Rep. Borton knows I fought with MDE after our ice storm because my kids were on spring break and then came back to 2 weeks of the ice storm. and then we had to come back and test them right away. How do you think that turned out? And I fought with MDE on whether that was the right move to make. I had support from the federal government to waive that assessment. And MDE said we couldn't do that. So it can be done. I think the new leadership is going to make a significant difference, and I think we can work together with MDE and with the legislature to look at these priorities. I mean, Representative Kelly and I have talked before. You have the priority to streamline the funding and make it less onerous on the district so that more money can flow to students. And we can do that when we work together. What happens sometimes is a legislator writes a piece in a budget that then creates hurdles on how we get there. And I think what happens is maybe the message, we often say to kids, your message got lost in how you delivered it, right? The message is lost in delivery. So how it's intended to be done, then it has to go to MDE, and they have to interpret it and figure out how to implement it. And then they do it, and then, oh, whoops, no, we forgot to tell you, you need to do this too. And oh, whoops, we got to. And so it gets appropriated at the, say October. But by the time it makes it through all those hurdles, we're one full year beyond. So I think there's room to improve that, and both with testing and with how we build that to work together to make that happen.
Katie, do we have a question from Representative Borton? Or
Sure.
No, all right. I was just worried about time. We've got three or four other students.
We do. So really, I think two areas, if you're asking how we can improve and move ahead, would to be looking at our state assessment plan and getting the accurate data to reflect the growth of our students, because I think there are many celebrations to be had. And then how we take the language and the intent of legislation and get it into play within the districts.
And just real brief on Katie's point here in terms of our testing. She talked about growth, but the other piece of that benchmark testing that's actually useful is it's actionable data for our teachers. They can dive in and say, we have got gaps here that we are not hitting. Our kids aren't getting it. What are we going to do differently as educators to support that? And speaking on the NWEA, we also use the NWEA, and it gives us that opportunity. We can break it down either by groups of classes all the way down to the single student level, where then we can differentiate not only for those groups, but also for those specific kids. And that's what we cannot do with the M-Step, one, because of when we get it, and two, because of what data we get, where those benchmarks allow us to really make a difference for our kids.
Representative Borton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment. Katie, Patrick, thank you for being here today. These conversations are so important, obviously, to us to be able to make different decisions or better decisions. I just want to mention, Patrick, in the beginning, you talked about having to wear different hats in your rural school district. I live in a rural area. Obviously, Katie's one of my superintendents up in northern Michigan. And at one time, Charlevoix County was part of my district before it was changed. So that meant I had Beaver Island. So I had a phone appointment with the superintendent there at a certain time, and I called, and the gal that answered the phone said, sorry, he's not available right now. And I said, well, I understand. He's probably in a meeting. And she goes, no, actually, he's still on playground duty right now, and he'll call you when he's done. Yeah, absolutely. So in rural areas, superintendents obviously play a very important role in many areas, and I certainly appreciate that.
Thank you.
Representative Jenkins-Arno.
Thank you, and thank you for being here today. I just have a question regarding, the House's proposal was to bring flexibility to the schools by kind of eliminating the categoricals, rolling them all up, and allowing you to determine how you wanted to spend your money. And yet, and so to me, when you talk about transportation or your central office staff and that sort of thing, that would be a great way to use that flexibility to craft your the way your school is set up. But, I know then in my area, almost every superintendent said, no, we want to keep the categoricals, except one who said, we would love to have that flexibility. So I just don't understand it just doesn't make sense to me. The flexibility, you want flexibility, and yet you want to keep the categoricals. It doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you for the question, Representative. I know that's very confusing for a lot of people. Here's the issue. If you roll up every categorical, you're making every child in every district in the state the same. those categoricals of let's take at risk. In my Lewiston building, I have 85% free and reduced students. They are the most at-risk population in our area. I have 25% of the students in the building have an IEP, an individual education plan with special education needs. Those students take more to educate. I grew up in Oakland County. I went to Troy schools. The difference in what's available in suburban Michigan to what is available in rural Michigan is very different. And so we have to have the categoricals to level the playing field, because it should not matter what zip code our kids live in. Every child in the state deserves the same opportunities. So some categoricals, like the retirement system, that's reflective of what our budgets are for our staff. The at-risk funding, the transportation funding, that's not a per pupil piece. That's per pupil based on the qualifications of that district. But a categorical like the state assessment that costs the same for everybody, no matter where they live, that's something that would roll up and give you greater flexibility. So you have to dive into each of those individual pieces and figure out which ones can be rolled up and which ones we need specifically to level that playing field. Does that make sense?
I just have one school district that talks about having money for, like, they get all kinds of money for the food service, so much so that they're always continually buying new equipment because they have all this money and they don't know what to do with it. And so it's like, what a waste of money there when they could use the money towards something else, maybe like a new bus or something like that. So it just, I think what you're saying is we have to kind of dive into it, look and see what it is that schools actually need. But how do we do that and keep it level playing field that's the trick. But, you know, because
And we are more than happy to be a part of that. I will come to the table and sit down with you and go through each of those lines. It took me several hours the other night to work through that budget and figure out how each line was going to impact our district. And with that budget that was presented, as we presented to our board last night, it looks to be an impact of less than 1.5% increase to our district.
Yeah, I would echo that with Katie. I am happy to come to the table and spend any extra time beyond my hours that I work within the school district, because I work really hard not to take away. I'll turn this again if you
Yeah,
don't
go
mind.
ahead.
I work really hard not to be there as much as possible as the principal, because the kids need a principal. They need that male role model. They need that figure right there, and so does the staff. But I'm happy to put in more time to help with that. No problem whatsoever to come up here and help with that.
I'm really lucky to be in a district now where I have principals.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other follow-up questions?
Not right now.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you again for having us.
Thank
I
you.
really
Thank you
appreciate the
very
time.
much.
Good morning, representatives. Thank you for having us here today. I'm Matt Shastel. I'm a superintendent at Langsburg Community Schools, which is about 20 minutes northeast of here. This is my 14th year as a superintendent. First of all, I just want to recognize that I think you serve on probably one of the most important subcommittees here in Lansing, because your decisions directly impact the youth in our state. And also, the schools that you represent in your districts are probably the backbone for most of your districts and most of your communities. So I just want to recognize the work that you do and how directly it impacts the number of citizens here in the state of Michigan. I'll be brief since my colleague from Fowler took up most of the time today. I just want to talk real briefly about, I can echo some of the things that Patrick had shared with you. One, I just want to talk, this is my 14th year as a superintendent, and this is probably one of my most difficult years in preparing a budget for my community and my school district and the families that we serve. This delay, almost a quarter into this fiscal year, is still difficult for us to manage. As you know, we get our state aid payments 11 times throughout the course of the year from October through August, and our October state aid is usually a partial state aid. So there are still some unknowns in some of the categoricals that were realigned or rolled up for school districts across the state of Michigan, namely the retirement system categoricals. We still don't know how those are going to impact our school district, which is still forcing us to delay decisions that impact our students. Also, the 31A requirements, that we would have to do an application process and possibly opt into those funds. We have to make a decision locally whether we will want to do that due to the changes of the rules after the start of the school year. Knowing that 31A was part of the budget process all the way through, we maintained our counselors, our social workers, and now there may be new rules that we have to force ourselves into to maintain those services for our students. So that's also very concerning throughout the process when you talk about timeliness of budgets and how they impact students. You know, it's going to be November here next week, and we still don't fully know a couple of the key categoricals that help run our school system. I also just want to talk real briefly about the ensuring resources are directed where they're needed. We talked a lot about categorical funding. The cost of for school districts like mine, who offer transportation, that is a very costly resource that we choose to do in our school district. There are school districts that do not provide that resource for their students. A new bus costs about $130,000. That's about what I get in my transportation fund for my community. It's not even really enough to cover the cost of one bus. We have about a 13 bus fleet. Finding a bus driver is very difficult. You have to be aggressive and you have to elevate wages. So every school district, probably in the districts you represent, are struggling with bus driver shortages and bus driving resources to maintain that fleet. So that's just one of those key categoricals that we say, well, yeah, we liked you rolling up some of those categoricals, but some of them are targeted for school districts that provide services that other school districts do that. So there are some of us that would advocate that, yeah, we certainly agree with some of your assessments that, hey, maybe some of these categoricals can be rolled up, but some of them are also very important for us to maintain. I also just want to reiterate the decisions that were done to eliminate a lot of vendor categoricals or vendor grants or vendor influences in this year's budget. There are many times as a superintendent that we would see the evolution of the budget take shape and how some of these categoricals were put in place, and knowing that some of those monies were not going to directly impact academic outcomes for kids or make school district operations any more efficient. So I applaud the people who are responsible in weeding out some of those vendor-specific programs, and knowing that the phone calls that superintendents typically get when those go in, you didn't know the service that you didn't know you needed until you got those calls. So I just want to reiterate that. So I know my colleague also has a few talking comments, but I'll also take questions.
Okay, good morning. My name is Greg Nean. I'm the superintendent of Marquette Algerisa, Region 1, along with Rep. Markkinen. Like you, we really want to focus on the future while learning from the past. My remarks will be centered largely around the beginning and the end of the budget process. That process ultimately has a significant impact on the work that we do as district-level administrators. So respectfully, I would begin today's conversation by simply asking a question. What reports and data are you currently using to provide informed governance? About 12 years ago, the Senate Fiscal Agency identified 33 required annual reports. That was about a dozen years ago. I would respectfully ask this committee to charge another analysis. I would hazard a guess that that number has grown over the last dozen years. The number of reports that we provide are oftentimes redundant, they're very granular, they're complex, and they often result in delayed funding with significant funding restrictions. So there's an awful lot of administrative work, to the chair's earlier comment and question, that is involved with grant management. It is a heavy burden in the administrative job description. I think the idea of synchronizing budgets on a calendar is a great one. I would really invite this committee to bring to this table those leaders from the Michigan school business officials. those are the folks that will be able to help you identify the problems that might come from trying to align a calendared budget. I think so much is lost in the messaging when you don't have a budget that's in place according to the required timelines. That rushed budget process really resulted in some poor messaging, and I think some gaps between what your intent was and what the actual implementation, to Katie's earlier reference. I use the Great Start Collaborative as an example of that. When I talk to representatives about Great Start, they say, well, we provided that funding, but it was part of the foundation allowance. Okay. The problem with that is if you go to a local district and you say, tell me about the value of Great Start Collaborative, they'll look at you like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's because that was an intermediate school district-led priority and initiative. So Great Start Collaborative is really the on-ramp to a child's educational career. It's the programming, it's the services, it's the funding, it's the systems that are in place to ensure that every child has a good start to their educational career. So there was a lost opportunity there. My other colleague from Fowler mentioned that zip codes drive opportunity with competitive grants. Absolutely agree with that statement. 80% of the school districts, as you all know, are rural. And yet, a lot of policy and decisions are based on urban and suburban populace. I could talk a little bit about the higher education allocation in the school aid fund budget. I could talk about the carve-out for Detroit Public Schools. I think those comments are already documented in the written testimony that I have provided. So if there are no further questions, I will yield the rest of the time to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Morning, Committee. I'm David Randalls. I do government relations for the Oakland County School Districts, and this is my dear friend, Mr. Steve Archibald, who I will let introduce himself as well. But we were working through the budget and trying to understand it. This conversation around health and safety money in the budget has been extremely active, both before the budget and especially after the budget. So Mr. Archibald here has a case study in how this one section has played itself out over the course of the last few years, and with that, I will turn it over to him.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, or good morning, everyone. Appreciate your time. It's truly a privilege to be able to be here today and to speak with you. And again, I'm Steve Archibald, Superintendent in Southline Community Schools. And despite my youthful appearance, I've been a district or school level administrator for over 32 years. And a little bit of background, in case you aren't familiar, Southline Community Schools, we service 83 square miles. We are in 3 different counties, which includes 8 different municipalities. So when you're talking about safety and security, you're talking about a lot of coordination with first responders in each of those areas. We have about a little over 8,300 students, 15 buildings, 12 of which are schools, and an early childhood center, and 2 district buildings, and just under 1,000 staff. We are represented by 5 different representatives, state representatives, 4 state senators, and 3 members of Congress. Safety and mental health, the footprint, I can tell you, in going back to the beginning of my career as an administrator in 1995, I've been involved with working with school resource officers in every step of my career since then. Safety and security has been and will only continue to be a greater part of our responsibility as educators. It is on the forefront of everyone's minds whenever we survey students, whenever we survey staff, whenever we survey parents, as we prepare bonds, as we look to spend the dollars that you provide to us. One of the top priorities is school safety and student mental health. That's not going to get less. Oop. It will if I press the, there we go. Prior to these dollars being available, the only safety dollars we really had access to as schools were minimal dollars and a competitive grant. And one of the conditions in that grant, if your district had received any of those dollars previously, you were automatically ineligible. And then Oxford happened, and post-Oxford, we were greatly relieved in the legislature's ability to put accelerated emphasis on school safety and mental health statewide. You made it very simple. We had very flexible grants used for evidence-based services, safety planning, and working with local health providers. In our particular district, we were able to hire support staff. We were able to hire critical safety personnel, professional development for our staff, various other pieces of equipment, software, and so forth. But moving from that limited competitive grant to the urgency that was created and was recognized post-Oxford, you made it extremely, significantly better for districts to get dollars and get them used quickly on the things that their district needed related to safety and security. Again, I provide some parent feedback there. At one point, we were required to get input from families at least once with respect to spending these dollars, and families put very high emphasis on services for student mental health and school safety. In our district, we've since done multiple other surveys, whether it was for an upcoming bond or our strategic planning, and these two areas continue to surface at very high priority. There's a lot of, the next few slides are pretty dense. I'll try to work through them pretty quickly. But again, in fiscal year 23, sections 31AA and section 97, the mental health and school safety pieces of the legislation were merged. Again, the distribution was on an equal per pupil basis, and there was much flexibility. Application process, relatively simple, no formal reporting or clawback. And I want to point out to you at the bottom of the right side of that page, because it's going to be very significant a couple slides later, the verbiage in this part of the legislation was 1,460 words. The legislation that was just passed has more than doubled in words. I can tell you that did not make receiving these dollars or being able to expend these dollars any easier for school districts. In fact, it did the opposite. It's going to make it more difficult for us. In fiscal year 24, again, these dollars were merged. Getting down to the main point, we had a larger pot of money, greatly appreciated, wider eligibility. We still had flexibility, and there was a soft nudge towards mental health, though I believe many of the districts and many of my colleagues that I talked with, we still tried to maintain a significant number, at least 50% of those dollars towards student mental health. But again, it was still relatively simple. We had sizable dollars, and we had tremendous flexibility. Like, this is my first PowerPoint. In fiscal year '25, in July, we saw a tremendous cut. Quite honestly, as administrators and responsible for this as districts, we weren't sure how to respond to this, because we have a responsibility to keep our students and staff safe, and it felt like the rug got pulled out from underneath us. It came back in October and provided some additional dollars, but there was a very clear message when those dollars were appropriated, which was they may not be there long-term, and locally you better find a plan for sustainability. Sustainability, if these dollars aren't provided in the legislature, for us districts means those dollars will come out of classrooms. There's no place else to get those dollars. Again, sharper guardrails, explicit deadlines, approval choke points, and more administrative lift amongst reduced dollars. Now, the legislation we're sitting with currently, and again, I'll draw your attention to the far right bottom of the slide. The same legislation that pertains to mental health and school safety is more than doubled in its word count. It's a simple example of how much more complicated it has become for districts to access these dollars, to have the flexibility to use them to best serve our students and staff, and to use them effectively. More than likely this year, with so many unknowns, I'll use the waiver as an example. We're yet to see it. We're yet to know the implications. We haven't reviewed it with our insurance providers. We haven't reviewed it with our attorneys. Yet it's held over our head that districts and boards must agree to foregoing some very important privilege in order to get these dollars to spend on their kids. Many districts, including mine, have held off on hiring counselors, social workers, and psychologists simply because we don't know that we'll have these dollars. If we move forward towards mid-year, now we've got a reduction in services to students, a disruption. We've got no continuity. When you're talking about social workers and psychologists and these folks working with our students, the familiarity that they have with students and with families is so meaningful to the work that they do over time. They don't see students just once. They work with students outside therapists. They build relationships. These are long-term, yet now we're going to have a revolving door, because who's going to commit to a position that they don't know they're going to have 6 months later? It's gotten very, very difficult, and it didn't need to, and it doesn't need to, and it can be corrected. Again, a lot of words on this slide. I talked about the staffing implications, the compliance load. I addressed that as well. The crisis response, I'll go back to just post-COVID, when we received those dollars and with the very broad allowable uses, districts were able to convene, in our case, Safety Advisory Committee with a cross-section of representatives from across our district, including law enforcement, and put plans in place to harden our schools, to address our policies and procedures, and to work to make our schools safer. Our ability to respond has been slowed. equity to access, there's already been a lot of conversation about the competitive grants. I think that puts smaller districts with smaller staffs at a distinct disadvantage. And I also wonder why we have to compete for dollars when it comes to student mental health and school safety. Wouldn't come without some recommendations. And again, an emphasis on local control. There was some very good conversation earlier in the testimony about that. Again, flexibility, removing or narrowing the legal triggers, giving us some predictability, multiple year funding as opposed to single year late funding, align with existing laws, and certainly transparency, but without punitive outreach. As educators, we don't back away from accountability. We're accountable to every single one of our parents, our students, and our staff every single day. And we won't back away from it, but we need your help to be able to deliver the services with regard to school safety and mental health that they deserve. And again, I'll conclude by just essentially where we started, which was going back to the initial response post-Oxford. We had large sums of money. We had broad use, and it was readily available for districts to do with it what they needed. Fast forward to today, we've got uncertain dollars going into the future with a lot of choke points and barriers that will prevent us from doing the work that I think we all, yourselves included, know is necessary and important. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Well, it sounds from just a synopsis of a mixture of things, both legislative and administratively, that are at fault here. We can fix the legislative things. We can, hopefully a new superintendent will fix the administrative things. But clearly there's a need to have some better alignment going forward and focused purpose. Representative Glanville.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing such a clear, again, example. And I'm sure this is just one area. I know there's been rumors of a supplemental. I don't know what that means, but I'm hoping that we might be able to address some of these issues in that process if it's afforded to us. One thing I did want to just kind of clarify, make sure I'm on the same page with you or hearing what you're saying, that many of these issues that you are experiencing stem from us as legislators. That's kind of what I'm feeling. And I'm not taking that as a negative. I couldn't agree more if if I have that correct. And then I also want to just, so aligning like how the work gets done. So we as legislators do the policy, right? We hand it off to MDE. MDE is then the department that is expected to interpret our intent and pass it on to our schools. And so again, kind of taking that backward, I feel like the root cause here is maybe the legislature, and maybe we need to work better with MDE, who can then, bring that down to you. Is that?
I think we'd be better served as opposed to trying to point blame, as to trying to understand how we got to this point and where we want to really be, and then working together as practitioners in the field and legislators to get where we want to be. I don't know that the blame game serves anybody
So, I'm
well.
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm not trying to play a blame game.
No, no, I
I'm
understand,
trying to
but since
focus
that-
on the role of MDE, and in
I
my
wanted to
opinion,
avoid blaming the
MDE
legislature.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll blame the legislature. Let me do that. As a member of the legislature, I am willing to take blame. And maybe not my colleagues, that's fine, maybe it's not on them. But I guess what I'm trying to point out here is that, MDE, they are experts in the field. And in theory, the way that I have worked with them as an educator and as a legislator is relying on that. Like, you all, thank you for coming here today. But you have very important, time-consuming jobs that you have taken the time away to be here and tell us something that, in effect, we should be having this conversation, in my opinion, with the department and with you, but we need the department. And the department is that intermediary, and I feel like we need to be working better with them. And that's all I guess I wanted to say, and you don't need to agree. I won't put you in that position.
Thank you.
Or disagree. Thank you.
Representative Beeson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. And I was on the school board. That's how I came through here and got to this position. But we're doing the same with the department at MDE that we're doing for small businesses. And it's coming down to the regulation that we're putting in place and double entering everything. It doesn't matter, even your small meat shops are doing it, that work with the DNR. They're doing, everything is like they want another piece of data, another piece of data, another piece of data, to the point where the data now becomes the problem because you don't have enough time. And this is happening in our state across the board. So it's not so much the legislators as, hey, let's thin this down. Let's make it simple. Like, let's get through it in 5 minutes. Like, we all learned this in marketing class. If you can pick it up, it's on one piece of paper, everybody can read it. It's going to get done, not 24. Like, the amount of words you put into this, it shouldn't be like that. I agree. But that's what we do in our state. We continue with my wife being a counselor in 31N. Like, she spends more time at home doing her paperwork because she will not say no to a kid. And I'm thinking, well, you now became like you left the private industry to go in to do something to help people, and it's more and more paperwork to the point where, like, that's the problem is that data, and we got to figure out a way to streamline it so it's fast for you guys and it's fast for the state, for us too. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Appreciate you all taking the time today to, and this hopefully isn't the end of this, and only a beginning. I think we could probably have this meeting every week, honestly, to get, I think, where we all want to go. So again, thank you for your time. Representative Borton moves to excuse absent members. There being no objections, the motion prevails by unanimous consent, and there being no further business, the meeting is adjourned.